pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We were joking before we started that we have not gotten together in a while, and that's true. In fact, we had a meeting right after the election, but we didn't, it was a tri-board meeting, I think. So the first order of business is to conduct the Board of Finance Chair and Vice Chair appointments. And so that's the first action at the meeting, first meeting, regularly scheduled meeting after the Board of Elections. So I'll open the floor to nominations for chairman of the Board of Finance.
I'd like to make a nomination or nominate Rob Pomeroy as chair.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So moved. So I'll be looking for nominations for the position of vice chair. Moved.
Would like to nominate Lisa Hebner.
All right.
I second.
And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Discussion, aye. Aye. So moved. All right, so we're delighted to have a good working team. Again, unfortunately, Derek can't be here tonight, but we're glad to have a full board and again, Art joining us this year. All right, next up is the...
Chair, before you go on to the next, could I just ask a question?
Sure.
I'm obviously brand new.
Yep.
And the board has operated on a 4-2 ratio before, and now it's 3-3, and this could have been contested, but it was worked out, and you, as chair with experience and the concurrence of the other members, the chair, and this is the vice chair, and I understand that everyone is pleased with the procedures, but that the procedures will change going forward because of the parity on the board, and I would just like to hear in your words and Lisa's words, how you see that unfolding going forward. Just we can be explicit about it right at the start.
Appreciate that. And to be fair, I've only been on a board that's been 4-2 the time I've been here. So although I think we actually, Mauro had changed her affiliation at the end, so it didn't really matter, but.
She did?
She did.
Yeah, she actually did, but.
To what?
Unaffiliated, but what I would say is that I appreciated the opportunity to work with Lisa as vice chair. I think it very little of what we discuss is purely political. I think there are other motivations that separate the way we look at things, like thinking about taxpayers, thinking about development, thinking about growth of the community, thinking about people on limited incomes versus others. So I think that from my perspective, we have a very good communication among our board. We always have very little contention in my entire time on the board. So I think that what I would look for is openness and conduct. I'll take this opportunity to remind everybody that we can't communicate with ourselves about topics individually between meetings because of the Freedom of Information Act and state charter. We can communicate a little bit, but we can't have forums or caucuses that would conduct business other than in the forum that's open. So I would hope to continue to have a very open dialogue with all of the members and to work very cooperatively.
Will there be any changes in procedures, such as working on agendas ahead of time, or will nothing change as before, or will there be any procedural changes?
Yes.
Good question. So when Lisa volunteered to be the vice chair, and I thought that was a great idea, we agreed that we would both be involved in the agenda making going forward. And that is a change from what we've done before.
Thank you.
Thank you. So those were things I wanted to bring up, but
Okay.
you voted so fast and you had time.
Okay, all right, fine.
And that's worked well. I mean, Rob has been very open in the past to taking agenda items from any member of the board, but it's convenient to have us, just as Eric and Sean participate in the agendas. We view it as a similar arrangement. and appreciate staff's willingness to work with both. So thank you.
And just, you weren't on the board, but when Barbara Pettigene was the chair and I was the vice chair, that's how we did it too. It's a
Okay.
very, very bipartisan and totally partnership
Yeah.
kind of approach.
We like it that
So
way.
I think that will work well.
One of the oth-
Can
I'm
I
sorry,
just
go ahead.
clarify one other thing?
Sure.
And that is, you said that nobody could talk to each other.
Caucuses.
No,
Yeah.
it's,
And you said even in caucuses, and actually, when you're in your own party,
that you can do that, yes.
And a chair and a vice chair can talk to each other too.
Yes, and so individual members can talk about things. It's, we have to be careful if
Not,
we
it can't be a meeting. You
can't have a
decide
meeting
things.
by email or a meeting, by conference call.
Interestingly, in a 4-2 board, you can't caucus because that's the majority of the board decision. So that is sort of an interesting.
Oh, never thought about that.
I thank you for that clarification.
All right, appreciate it. One other thing we do, we started doing is having good meetings with Amy before we put the agenda together to be sure that we have a good sense of certain things that are happening on the other important boards, like the Board of Selectmen and others, to be sure that we get those things on the agenda. So, appreciate the question. All right?
Yep.
So the next up is the draft Board of Finance rules and procedures. We actually had this on the agenda back for the December meeting that didn't happen, and we've been talking about this. I think, Linda, you put this together, right? Or
Well,
was it-
actually, we put this together years ago, and Jeff Blumenthal did, and Moira jointly did most of the work writing it. And I had thought we'd adopted it
Yeah, me
ages
too.
ago, and turned out it never actually got officially adopted. So we all need to just make that official.
Great.
And if anybody has comments
Thank you.
on anything.
Yeah, appreciate that. Were there any comments? It's been out there for a while. I think it pretty well represents how we actually run the meeting, so I think that's good.
I actually, in rereading it just this weekend, thought there might be one tiny clarification that I would make, and that's in item number 9, where it says members of the board may participate by telephone or other similar electronic means when necessary. I would take out the when necessary and say either nothing or when unable to physically attend. I mean, I think we always want people to come if they can, but if they can't come because they're sick in bed or they're traveling, it should be their prerogative. I wouldn't want somebody to misinterpret when necessary being at the chair's discretion of, necessary to get a
Right.
quorum. as
So, yeah, I was
opposed
going to
to-
say, it sort of implies to make a quorum. but-
Yeah, but I think it ought to be, if someone wants to participate by phone, they can.
I think that's fine, and I don't think we need to go into great detail. I know we've had some good experiences telephonically and some
Yeah.
bad ones, and so,
I think we've learned how to avoid the bad
yeah, well, I think we have
ones.
better connections now than we have in the past, but there have been more than one occasion when it was appropriate to do that. So I agree with the
Yeah, when unable to physically attend.
All right?
So I move that with that one amendment, if
Or without objection, I don't hear any objection.
that we.
No,
We are Robert's rules here, without objection, we can just simply make the change.
Okay.
So you move you move that we adopt these policies and procedures with the amended language when able to attend.
When unable to physically
Unable to
attend.
And there are hearing no objections to that. We need a second for that.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So those will become our new, not new, approved and on the record policies and procedures. Okay, next is the 2020 Board of Finance meeting goals and agenda topics discussion. And I guess I would let Lisa describe what we have included in the package here and what the intent of this is. I think it's great that we. Go ahead.
What we tried to do is take topics that all of you have raised in the past and sort of figure out, okay, instead of doing them ad hoc, we need to do this, to lay it out in advance so that we, helpful for staff, for planning. Some involve inviting people as visitors to do presentations. And what we had is agenda planning in December. We tried to do that, but our meeting got canceled. But we should do that every December, sort of take a look ahead. Debt modeling for capital, which is happening this month. Our auditors will finish their report and give their presentation either January or February. We're waiting on final notification from our auditors. When we amended our retirement subcommittee plan, we said we wanted to have a report and presentation from our consultant twice a year. So we put the first one in February. And we thought it made sense also at that time to have a presentation from our assessor, because the grand list is due at the end of January. So she will have 5-year projections. At that point, we can ask questions about tax credits and abatements and upcoming development projects, so we can get a sense of what's coming down the road. Then the annual report, and looking at the charter, under the duties of the town manager, it says the town manager shall assist the Board of Finance with the annual report. While we're very happy to have you do the work, to meet our
Maria.
fiduciary obligation, it would be good to have a consultation with us, and we could say, hey, we'd like you to look at this or that, and then to come to us for final approval so we can meet our fiduciary duty. But I don't see in practice much changing other than that. And then update from the state budget from Representative Hampton and Wick goes in March, because the governor's budget comes out in February, so they should be able to give us a good preview of what's coming up. March and April are the budget hearings required by charter. Retirement subcommittee reports, Amy graciously put those in. They're quarterly, and so after the subcommittee meets, we can have the report of our liaison. Debt planning, that's the June, July request that we had of the tri-board to do a deep dive into debt modeling and what that means coming up. Then also in that same period, do long-term planning and take a look at what's our grand list, what is our mill rate projections, where are we going. Then in August, do an OpenGov presentation. We actually have this wonderful tool that we don't use and that a lot of us don't understand, and it would be a great idea to bring the representative, because we have some information up there, but the wealth of information that they can provide is just phenomenal. It would be a great tool, not only for the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, and members of the public. And if you want to sort of see how that tool can be used optimally, look at Austin. And actually, Hartford uses it very well. Then savings initiatives by the Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed, and that was actually a Linda initiative many years ago, and Rob.
Linda.
The two of you had us do that. And that's a useful exercise to go through and understand what initiatives are out there, what are potentials for cost savings. And we wanted to do that. And now, Rob, I'll let you speak to why we felt it was important to do that separate than the budget.
Yeah, so we think that, I think you had just done this when I had come on the board, which was to encourage the spend to save and initiatives where through shared services or the most obvious one, but between both our existing boards. But look for places where we can have a mindset for savings as opposed to just in the budget process.
There's actually even state statute that specifically says the Board of Finance can, give ideas to I can't remember if it's both boards or just the Board of Ed, but to both, I think, makes sense.
So having this in August, it separates it from the budget process so that in anticipation of this meeting, there can be some real thought about how we can actually implement some of these ideas longer term.
And then we just put a standing policy review in August to see if there are any updates to existing policies we want to make or need to make. And then in September, have a presentation by our hired new internal service fund manager to go over the health of the fund and to ask questions from the board, so we can make sure that fund remains solvent and answer any questions that this board may have. Retirement, again, report and presentation, that's the twice yearly report. October budget, our board, discussions about the tri-board coming up. So
In anticipation of the tri-board meeting.
Correct. And then December, the tri-board, that might be November, depending on how the dates work. Again, retirement subcommittee, and then we put standing, the building department does a revenue report every month, and we asked Amy to just attach that to her budget report so that we can see trends in terms of revenue from the building department and development. And then we asked for a standing report on the Board of Education Task Force. I know Derek couldn't be here, and I know Matt put out a letter saying, oh, the task force is going to meet at the end of the month, but there was no date or time or location, so we were hoping to get that information. Maria, do you know that?
January 30th at 6 p.m. Board of Ed conference room.
Great. And that's important for the public to know in case they want to attend and watch. I don't know that they have public audience, but
Where's the meeting being held?
Board of Ed conference room.
and then, we're open, this is not set in stone if people want to add, and we just passed our rules of procedure, which allow any member to request an agenda item, so, but it's just, these are the basic things that either we're obligated to do by charter to meet our fiduciary duty, or because it meets our goals of transparency, and
I think it's good because it makes sure we don't overlook stuff in the frenzy to get budgets done and the like. That's good.
Kevin, you have a big role in this.
I do.
All right, any questions or comments on this? I think this will help us disperse the work of the board, nice during the year in timely fashion, and always have something important to talk about, which we always do. All right, so no comments to that, we're using this going forward. All right, next up is school facilities long-range planning update. Unfortunately, I found out this afternoon that Derek is under the weather and was unable to attend, so we will make sure that we get that actually on the agenda almost every meeting. I apologize that we don't have a report for you on that.
Can we take a moment to talk about the
Sure.
topic a little bit anyway?
Yeah.
And maybe it's something Amy can carry back, because I know you're doing double duty in all your free time. It occurs to me that, I spend a lot of time reading through that really, really fat notebook about the inspection of each school, and I've looked at all the stuff on the website. And in looking at their projections for the peak of 300 additional students a few years down the road, one of the things that I'd really like to get a better handle on is more long-range demographics than what was presented there, because I think the solutions for addressing a peak that is truly a peak are quite different than the solutions that if that's just the beginning of a trend. You see what I'm saying? And so I don't have a good sense of what's happening in the bigger world of demographics that's driving that particular number of 300 that they gave us. Everything you read about Connecticut is that the population is shrinking. Simsbury's bucking that trend a bit. But I mean, there are other things that can happen even if the population is stagnant, if sectors of it, segments of it are shifting and retirees leaving and young families moving in, the total might stay the same, but the impact on schools could be different. So I'm just trying to get a better handle on that, and I don't know if that's something that they've done. And also, I know they talked in the flyer that Matt Curtis sent out a bit about the need to get a better sense of what the public is interested in, and something that I would like to see happen, which we did when we were considering the senior center some years back, and I don't know if you were on the board then, Rob, or that might predate you.
I think that was with Barbara.
Yeah. We had a lot of concern about the ability to finance what was a drop in the bucket compared to what's being proposed for the Board of Ed. What was it, $12 million? And so we did a public survey to get a sense of what were people looking for and what was their tolerance for increases in taxes in order to create something new like that. And I don't feel like I have as good a sense of what the public would like as we should before we embark on something of this magnitude. And Matt did mention something in his letter about wanting to, I don't know if he said focus groups or survey or something, but that would be something I'd like us to all work together on, and not just on the Board of Ed, but really, and if it requires some, funding, I know this is a rare thing for me to say, but I'd actually be willing to pay for it. But I think it's really important that we test the public's appetite for the kinds of proposals that are happening.
I think that's a good suggestion. I think, the difficulty, of course, is chicken, egg,
Right.
cost versus, we're trying to get to a place where we can start to get our arms around
Yep.
what it will cost, when it will cost that, what are the benefits we actually receive. But I agree with you that we need level of input. I think there was an explicit decision not to do the charrette type process for this, but rather to get, and that's why we commissioned the $200,000 study in the first place, was to get professionals to look at both the condition of the buildings and recommendations along what we have, as well as some innovative ideas about how we could deliver educational services better. One of my big things is that, and again, I haven't heard much about this in the dialogue, is what are the operational savings that we can achieve by the redesign of the collective school systems? Because this is one of the things I've been talking about is if we have those grades realigned in a way that classrooms can add students more efficiently in the target range of classroom sizes, instead of in some locations having to add a full-time equivalent. Those are the kinds of things with administration costs and transportation costs and all the rest of those, that although it won't pay for the whole huge amount, it is definitely something that we are trying to achieve. I think that we want to, it's a goal to achieve through this process. And so I would add that to the list of things that we want to be sure are on the table and being discussed.
And then I would just add one more. As I was telling Rob, my sister-in-law used to teach at a very prestigious private school in Marin County, California, and they were all in portables. And I said, well, you have the richest people in the world sending your kids here. Why are you doing this? Why didn't you invest in capital? I said, because we invest in educating the children. They send their kids here because we get results for our children. It's because of the approach we take in education. So I guess I'd want to understand, if you're going to do a build, what are the kids going to get out of it? Is it just a beautiful space, or will we see an educational benefit to it? And how do you measure that? And is that where you want to, when you have limited dollars, do you want to invest in really nice buildings, or in teacher education, or in other things that might perhaps have a more direct benefit to the children? So, because when we think about tolerance for the mill rate, is there tolerance for both the beautiful building and increased educational resources, and which is going to help the child more? So I'd be interested in that discussion as well. And the other thing, Maria, if you want, last time we did this with the senior center, we took advantage of the opportunity while we were doing survey and did our town-wide survey and added some economic development questions and how we're doing questions. And that was an opportunity. Once you're doing it, adding a few more questions, the cost isn't that much. So it's worth talking to the Economic Development Committee to see if there's an interest in that as well.
All right, so we'll tee that all up for next month, and Derek better get to work. Help us with all of this. All right, strong interest in all of this going forward, and obviously will be talked about quite often. All right, next up is the Parks and Recreation Special Revenue Fund Analysis Work Group.
So as you know, during the last budget cycle, there was a lot of discussion around the Parks and Rec funds, the losses over the years, a discussion around the expenditures related to community use, what fund should they be in, should everything be in the general fund, should things be in all of the Parks and Rec fund. So the boards had requested that staff perform an analysis of the fund to have a more detailed discussion on this. That report is attached to the agenda submission in this packet. At their meeting on January 13th, the Board of Selectmen voted to establish a work group to review this analysis and make policy recommendations. So as part of this, the work group is going to be comprised of 2 Board of Selectmen members, 2 Board of Finance members, and 2 Culture, Parks and Rec Commission members. So we are looking for volunteers on the Board of Finance to assist in this discussion.
There was a committee before, and I was on it, and I can't remember who else.
Was this guy.
I was on it also. I think we only met once or twice.
Once, that was like, once. I'm happy to do it, to continue
We
in
thought
that role.
it might be nice to recruit the new guy.
I put on the retirement subcommittee the first day I was on the Board of Finance, so.
Derek's not here, just saying.
Retirement Subcommittee. I'm already on this retirement subcommittee.
So that leaves you, Art.
Okay,
All right, if somebody wants to make a motion, then in the packet.
Well, I move that we nominate Linda and Art to be our representatives on the Parks and Recs Special Revenue Fund Analysis Work Group.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. But before you move on.
Yep. Well, that's, yeah.
I'd be if we're going to represent this group, I'd be interested in your thoughts about the report.
Well, it wasn't just to elect the group.
Okay.
Because I do have some, and I know that you do. I guess I read through the whole report, and I came away wanting to know an apples to apples comparison. So, first of all, I would have preferred that you picked 1 or 2 of the options instead of saying these are the 3 or 4 options. So I get that we either segregate it. I understand if the option is to move it all inside the general fund, then that would be clear. To move it, I would have liked to have seen how this would look if we had taken out the things that you indicate, or that whoever did the report indicate that would make the most sense to take out, how the fund would look on an annual comparison basis.
I agree with that.
And then, so that when we're done with the work group, what I would like to see is, here is a special revenue fund that we have, on average, a hope can be self-supporting through fees. And we know that that's a pipe dream, because golf is a big part of this, and the weather makes a big deal. And, there could be good years and bad years for some of the programs, but that the goal of that would be to have the items for which we charge enough to pay for the marginal costs of performing the service. I think that would be a goal that I would set. And then separately, we have in the general fund a block of expenses for the betterment of the town through providing recreation, and that would be facilities, administration, and management. That's what I would like to see. And then what I would like to see is, if we did that, if we had done that, what would the historical operations look like? And what could we expect that general fund number to be going forward? And I thought that's where we were headed. But is that, did I miss it, or?
I think from our perspective, we're not there yet, because there are differing opinions on where expenditures should be located, what should be considered community use, does it make sense to split salaries? So I think kind of starting from square one with the work group, knowing what we know from this data, and then what do you want to see, and then we'll show you what it looks like.
The only thing I would add to that is I do see a value in keeping a special revenue fund. Or if you're gonna convince me, no, you wanna make it like the library and put it all in the general fund, I'd wanna know sort of the equity issues. Who is using the Parks and Rec? Is it seniors subsidizing families? Or is it families subsidizing seniors, or is there equal use? And who's using it? Is it the same people who use it every week, or is it single use, or how many people are using it? My inclination, and when you look at GFOA, they say, well, you have a special revenue fund when you have programs that are fee generated, and you do want to segregate. And I just want to clarify, last year you had said you can account for it as we're making that decision either way, whether it's in the general fund, the special revenue fund, or broken down. So it's not a matter of being a hardship on you to account for it. But the policy decision is, do we want to keep it as a fee program or turn it into the library? And if we're going to do that shift, I really need to understand the demographics of who's using it. Because our seniors, we're seeing the mill rate go up. I'm not sure I want people who never use it subsidizing a program that has a fee. But I think Rob's right. There are some costs that should be in the general fund, so I'm willing to do a shift there. But I'd want to understand how that will impact the mill rate.
Maybe I'll make one more comment now to turn it back. The one time we had our meeting, there seemed to have been a lot of focus and discussion about the allocation. And to me, that seems to miss the point. It was about allocating, well, this shouldn't be allocated, this was allocated. I'd rather have it set up in a way, and you can do it any of three ways. One, you could do it all the way in, all the way out. I just am not a fan of allocation because I think it takes you away from figuring out whether this is a benefit we should invest in as a town. And the other part is, are we charging market rates and appropriate rates for the services that are provided to help offset the cost? So that's me talking for our group as giving input to our two volunteers on the workforce.
Kevin, do you have any?
I have no comments, no.
I mean, the one thing that I was struck by is that this was all about rearranging where the numbers go without any discussion or recommendations about how to better finance the costs there, and are there some cost savings or revenue generating things that could be done to address the gap between revenue and expenditures. And I'm totally on board with moving some of it back into the general fund, and totally on board with subsidizing it, because I do see it as a big community benefit for everybody. And I agree with Lisa that there should be fees for people who use it, so you don't have people in the community who, never go there paying for others who use it all the time. But I think there may be some things that we could look at to generate additional revenue. And so I won't go through those, but we can talk about those on the work group. Because if all we're going to do is move the numbers around, we haven't really accomplished anything for the taxpayer. And that's just an accounting thing. It
I
doesn't.
agree.
And the only thing, it would be a little hard to measure the use of it, right? From overall perspective, because, right, everybody goes, that's the sledding hill. So how do you measure people that go there and do the sled riding? Or the people that walk around the golf course in itself? So it's a little hard to measure. To Lisa, to your point.
Well, that's the public good part of it. I agree
Correct.
with that.
Yep.
But there are other parts that are easy to measure.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
who's participating in the
Yeah,
program.
absolutely.
And who's going to the pool and who's going to the ice rink.
Well, the Friends of the Golf Course have a strong opinion about this, and there are a lot of constituents. Let me ask, what's the timeline for the work group, and what's the goal? And is it to impact this budget cycle?
You want?
So we are,
It doesn't,
Is on?
it doesn't
It's not
amplify
Oh,
it for the
sorry, okay.
recording.
no, so we are going to do our best to get to scheduling the work group rather quickly. Again, key staff members that will be involved to support the work group will be Amy, Tom Tyberski, Melissa, myself on a more limited basis. But again, they were the key members who were involved with the analysis and have the most knowledge of the subject. So we will be trying to pull together those dates rather quickly. Ideally, it would be great if at the end of the day we land in a place where we're fully ready to implement everything planning for this budget cycle, that may not be possible. But again, I think if we can start taking some small steps towards some of the recommendations that may come from this and implement those this budget season. We did a little bit of that last budget cycle, right? So we increased fees to most of our programs. We reduced a staff position. We made some changes to our energy to help close that gap. So, right, we did the natural gas conversion. We put the solar panels up. So I think some of those measures have already been taken. But again, a couple of those key policy questions in terms of, which community use expenditures do folks feel most comfortable shifting over to the general fund? Again, some of those policy questions and conversations, if we can get some resolution on them going into this upcoming budget cycle, that would be great. I think trying to tackle everything probably this season may be a little too aggressive. But again, if we can at least come up with baby steps and a plan for moving forward.
Yep.
When you, I think in here that it says that the restaurant and the golf management contracts are up for renewal when?
Right. So 2020, under our procurement policies and procedures, the recently revised ones, those contracts would be scheduled for a competitive RFQ process this year.
2020 when?
Just generally probably spring, I think timeframe is what we were looking at. I'll double check with Tom Tyberski on that timeframe, but I think it was probably spring was when we would want to be issuing those. Both, I believe, end at the end of the 2020 golf season, so late fall, I want to say November-ish timeframe. So again, something we would probably want to begin in the spring.
Okay. Any other questions or comments or guidance? So,
Well, I see three principles here. One is that the town ought to subsidize an event which is for the benefit of the town. Secondly, user fees ought to be appropriate and measured. You don't want free golf, but
Right.
people ought to be able to walk and use the parks. We figure that is. And third, an examination of where the weaknesses and the points that need shoring up are. So that's my summary of where it is.
Yeah. we got the right guy in the job.
We'll see.
All right. Next up, budget status report.
We'll start with the general fund. I'll just take you through some of the highlights. On the statement of revenues, as you can see, the estimated variance between 2020 actuals as of December 31st, 2019, and what I estimated to be as of December 31st, there is higher revenues of about 4.8 million. The majority of this relates to the tax collections. This time of year, we typically see tax collections are at around 60% collected. And as you can see from the budget status report, our tax department is showing collections of about 65%. So that 5% resulting in about that 4.4 million.
So
What
so
is
just,
that attributed to?
yeah, that was,
Just timing of when people make payments.
so they just
When
paid a
people
little
pay,
earlier.
when people pay.
We're
So-
still in projection for the same revenue from taxpayers.
Right. It's just the timing that more people paid in December than January
I wonder why.
compared to last year.
Is this, is this unusual, this almost $5 million to be ahead at 12/31?
No, I mean, it's a difference of 60 to 65%. It's just such a large dollar value because of the taxes that we collect are so large.
So the tax bill is this, it's in two pieces. It's the same.
The cars,
Both
the
have.
cars are,
Oh, the cars are all in the
One-
front
just
line.
one bill.
Right, right.
and that comes in July.
July,
That's why it's not 50/50.
right.
Okay, that was
Sure.
a good number.
Under the finance department, you'll see that actual is in excess of estimates by 226,000. This is due to our investment income. I don't know if you recall, but we budgeted about $400,000 for investment income.
Where are you now? I'm sorry.
2 lines down from the tax department and finance department.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, sorry.
Yep, that's all right.
I was
Where is she?
jumping ahead. Finance is 226,000.
Yep, more than budget than estimates. So when I did my estimates, I estimated about half of the investment income, which is about $200,000. But for our investment income, we're actually already at about $425,000, which is in excess of our budget in whole for investment income, resulting in the $200,000 surplus above my estimates for December 31st.
We had adjusted those estimates during the budget process. We had a conservative estimate there, and then we increased that.
I think it
Okay.
was like at 150,000,
Right.
then we moved it up to
So you're saying that that's not a timing difference, that's a permanent difference?
That's a permanent difference. We're already at
Nice.
$430,000, I believe, around there for investment income.
And what's that attributed to?
Market gains,
Yeah, market's been going well.
interest rates. And then moving down to the town clerk's department, you'll see that the actuals are in excess of my estimates by $142,000. There was a sale of Simsbury Commons property that resulted in a large conveyance fee of about $104,000. So this put us at 80% of our budget for conveyance fees for this year. Those were the highlights on the revenues. Any other questions on those?
No.
Okay. Moving on to expenditures. The total expenditures at the bottom of the page, you'll see the expenditures are comparing December 31st, 2019 to December 31st, 2018. And you'll see that we were about 6.3 million less in expenditures in 2020 compared to the same time in 2019. The reason for that is the majority of it relates to the Board of Education. You'll see that they were down $6.1 million. However, this isn't a true accurate reflection. Apparently, there was a lag in getting the journal entries entered into the town and the Board of Education have separate accounting systems. So everything the Board of Ed does, the town needs to duplicate. So they provide us their journal entries and we duplicate it. There was a lag in getting them in due to staff, timing on the management side. So I had them make sure that they were all in for today. And then looking back on that now, the new number for 2020 actual as of 12/31/19 is $31,731,000. So right in line with where it was last year.
So I have one question on the previous page about dispatch. I didn't understand what was happening there in public safety.
So during the fiscal year 20 budget process, we broke out police and dispatch last year. I'm sorry, not last year. Yes, last year. In fiscal year 19, police and dispatch were all recorded under just the police department. And then for 2020, we broke it out to separate police activity versus dispatch activity.
I have a question about why on the revenues page you did an estimate, whereas on the expenditures page you used last year.
That's actually because you asked me to on the revenue side when I first started.
No, I knew I asked you to
Yes.
do, but I thought I'd asked you to do the same on both, so maybe I'm remembering wrong.
Yeah, you had just had me do the estimated. I
We
can
beat
add
Amy up pretty good last time for this, but,
I can add the actual if you want.
yeah, so
It's, either one is fine, it just gives
I would
us
do
something
both.
to compare it
Oh,
to, that's helpful, so.
yeah.
I just wondered why it was different, like, why one and not the other.
It's helpful to know. I mean, one of the things, Amy, I asked her that specific question. I said, well, what are we looking at the end of the year? And she told me she actually, if there's an issue, she highlights it in the narrative. So we do get that highlighted, but sometimes it's helpful just to look at the paper as
sure.
well.
You can make your reports look however you want.
We so appreciate it.
Um,
So the golf course is doing great. What's the problem?
Right, yeah, big improvement.
Moving on to Simsbury Farms. Yes, the golf course is doing great. However, the recreation programs and the Simsbury Farms complex programs, although it looks like they are at an increase compared to the prior year, if you recall, that's because of the deferred revenue. This is not in your report. I just did this before I came, but if we were to take out the deferred revenue, recreation programs is actually down about 20,000 compared to the same time last year. And the Simsbury Farms complex activities are down about 18,000 compared to the same time last year.
Amy, I have a question about programming. So if programs are by fees, so if you don't have enough people sign up, then you can't cover the costs of the thing. So are you still offering the programs even though you're not covering the costs? Or is there a point where like only 2 people signed up, therefore we cancel? I mean, when is your break even? Do you do it at the cost break even, or are we subsidizing the programs?
We're not subsidizing the programs as far as I know. I do sign off on the refunds for the Parks and Rec, so I know if there's low enrollment, they do cancel.
So how is it possible that there is a deficit in the programming then? I mean, you would
Well,
only offer
is it
the
a deficit or
program.
it's just lower than last year?
It's just lower than last year. There's not
Ah.
a deficit in the programming. If
Got
you
it.
look at the Parks and Rec analysis, there's a little bar chart that you can see where the revenues were in excess of expenditures, and now they're kind of break even.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, so the recreation programs in the Simsbury Farms complex are down, but like Rob said, golf course is up, which is great. Showing a net change in fund balance as of December 31st of $147,501. However, if we were to take out the deferred revenue, we would be at a deficit of $119,000. The majority of that is because we added an additional $80,000 from the general fund in the current year. And then, of course, the increased golf. Any other questions on that fund? Okay. Moving on to the health insurance fund. I'm just gonna go all the way to the bottom where it has your total reserve. Currently, our reserve is at 4.8 million. Right now, we were at 33% of expected claims. Our health insurance advisors state that we should be at 20 to 25% of expected claims, so right now, we're on the higher side. I expect that to decrease as the year goes on, though. We actually did have a couple high claim payments that came in this week. So that's definitely going to be offset as time goes on. But right now, we're still in a good position. Everything is where it needs to be. We'd rather be higher than lower. The fund is in a positive position and no real issues to note here.
It was just,
Don't ask us for $850,000 this year,
I
though.
will not.
That includes the 850
That includes
transfer.
the
it does, yeah.
Does it include the
Turned out not to
400?
be.
Did we do the additional 400 transfer? So it
Did that
includes
at the
the
end of
1,200.
19, yeah.
Yeah. So this is just a nit, but the variance on the claims on the far right, those are positive variances, not negative.
In
On,
the
Well-
middle
The
section.
the expense, the actual expense is less than the 19 actual expense, so
Yeah, it should be favorable.
it should be
shouldn't
favorable, otherwise it
should not
doesn't add up to the
parentheses.
208.
oh, I see what you're saying.
I just wanted you to know I read these things.
Right now?
We go through them with a fine tooth
That
comb.
was very good.
I'll change that. On the residential rental property fund, you can see in the 2020 budget column, we had an estimated net change in fund balance as of the end of the year of about $27,000. But you will also see under 2020 actual as of December 31st, if you look at building improvements, there was a $17,000 charge here that was unexpected. This was due to a septic replacement that happened in the current year. So by updating our year-end estimates, instead of being at about $27,000 surplus, we'll probably be around $12,700 surplus. Moving on to the sewer use fund. Right now, we're showing a net increase in fund balance of 1.5 million, but you'll also note that we're at about 93% collected as far as our assessments. So this number will go down as our expenditures catch up to our revenues. I didn't really have anything else to highlight on any of the special revenue funds, but if you have questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
I have one question on Town Aid Road. Are we gonna get that money, and if so, when?
Town Aid Road, yes, we are expected to get that money, and I believe we get it in January. Hold on.
It's late though, right?
Yes.
And the low SIP as well.
The LoSiP we only apply for in March. I haven't heard about any extension on that. The Town Aid Road, we should be getting, it should have either just gotten it or it'll be January. Oh, I don't have the town one.
All right, thanks.
I'll follow up though.
And then the Ellsworth Trust, I don't know if the 350th is looking at it, but I think that's the one that has 23,000. I think that can be used for the beautification of Main Street. So if you guys are thinking about, if you want to do flags or banners or flowers, I think this is the year to sort of look at, do you want to use it, or some portion of it?
I just have one other comment, which is on the pension trust fund balances. I'll look forward to our next report from the retirement subcommittee. So that it struck me here that the OPEB fund balance seems high versus our actual liability. And so I don't want to go into it tonight, but when we have that next report, I'd just like to understand, where we are relative to the long-term liability of that fund balance. I was surprised to see that it was as big as the police pension trust fund. What's that?
Just a reminder that Board of Ed and town are included in OPEB. It's not just town.
Oh, so that explains it. Okay, thank you.
Are you going to talk at all about the capital list?
If you have questions, I don't really have anything to highlight. It's just giving you an update on when their expected completion date is and showing you that there's no deficits or nothing to worry about as of right now. So if you have questions.
I just was interested that the senior center design is completed, and there's $156,000 left.
I don't know if all bills are paid, but if all bills are paid, then this will go as part of your year-end closeout to move that money out to be used for something else.
So you consolidated a lot of these projects into we didn't do that last year. Still seems like a lot of them that are open.
There's still a lot, but we did close out a ton of them that were just hanging open.
Okay.
And just a comment, I know we're a long way from having a school master plan done, and that it's hard to count on what's going to happen there, but we've got a bunch of education projects that are fairly substantial things that you do, you do a new roof every 20 years. I'd hate to have us spend millions of dollars doing a new roof on a building that 2 years later they decide to tear down and replace. So, sorry.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
I just want to make sure we're being sensitive to that. I mean, obviously, if the roof is leaking, that's different, but if it's just being, done because we just assume that it should be done every 20 years, maybe we hold off on some of those things until we really know what we're doing on a master plan.
Farmington did that.
Pardon?
Farmington did that. They paved the school parking lot and then they tore the school down.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it kind of makes people a little,
Yeah.
Yeah,
unhappy.
don't do
They
that.
see things like that happen.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Thank you for the detail, Amy. I know that it's helpful. All right. Next up, supplemental appropriation for the ice rink boiler.
So, back on December 17th, the director notified myself and Maria that their boiler was down, and not only was it down, but it could not be repaired. So they needed a new boiler in order to make ice at the ice rink, because you have to use hot water to make ice at the ice rink and not cold water. I think I got that right. Did I get that right? Okay. Yeah. Was counterintuitive. So they are requesting the $10,000 to replace that boiler. This request went to the Board of Selectmen on the January 13th meeting, and they would like to take the money from the general fund and do a transfer from the general fund into the Parks and Rec fund to cover the cost of the boiler.
Amy, when I called you, you had mentioned there isn't a cash flow
There's no cash flow
situation.
issue.
So obviously, go ahead and fix the boiler. But I would recommend that we table this and wait and see if, for the last 12 years I've been on the Board of Selectmen, they've never not returned 60,000. So instead of doing necessarily just taking from general reserves, let's see if you can find internal savings. Or if you can't, let's do it all at once so we see everything, the whole budget as one picture when we make the changes. And that's the way the Board of Finance has done it traditionally.
Yeah. I think we should wait till the end of the year. I mean, you've got things like the 156,000 left over, and you've got a surplus in investment income, you've got a surplus in something else that got mentioned. They'll all wash out in the end. If you need more money, we'll give you more money. I mean, we're not saying don't do it. Obviously, you need to fix the boiler, but rather than doing these piecemeal, then at the end of the year, we'll true up everything.
Okay.
I agree with that. There's some threshold at which we probably should do it. But it's not $10,000.
That's right.
Right.
And it might not even be $100,000.
Right.
Okay. All right. Everybody okay with that? So we will not move, we take no action.
No action.
Okay, just take no action. All right, next up, the capital plan review and discussion. Did we do your
For the finance director.
finance director's report?
No, that's after the,
Huh?
that's after
We
the
could move
capital.
the
I
agenda
can
if
do
you
it
want.
first if you want.
Why don't we do your finance director's report, and then we can have our capital plan discussion, all right?
Yep. So just an updated listing of grants and donations that came in from November 2019 through about mid-January. I won't read them all to you, but just an updated listing. On our defined contribution and deferred compensation pension plans, the RFQ, we have received all of our responses to the RFQ that was issued. Right now, FIA is in the process of putting together all of those responses for management to review. They're looking to schedule something the beginning of March to have those results to us and to come in and give us a background on each one and who they liked and for what reasons, and just everything that was provided in the RFQ, and give us a detailed analysis. The fiscal year 20 bond issuance, we are going out to bond for half of the Henry James project. It'll be about $9 million. We're expected to receive the funds in mid-February, and we just had our bond rating call last Friday, which I think went well, and we should be able to get our rating tomorrow. So I will let you know what that outcome is. The debt
I'm
policy.
going to interrupt and just say I was on that call, and I'm going to just give a huge shout out to you, Amy, Maria, and Melissa, who did a wonderful job with the prep work and the presentation. It was very well done. It was very well articulated, and I think very well received. So I'm feeling very optimistic. So I do want to say that publicly. Thank you all.
I think you also are timing this very well. Rates have been sliding down a little bit every day. I don't know what, is this priced off of 10 years?
10 years.
Yeah.
No, 15 years.
It's a 15-year bond, but is it priced off of a 10-year note or a 15-year note?
15. On the debt policy work group, this is just in process. We have our first meeting that's been scheduled for January 30th. Some more to come on that. Under shared financial services, there is a memorandum of agreement in your packet that was signed by the town manager and the superintendent for temporary financial services to be overseen by myself. I'll provide the oversight of the Board of Education related to their accounts payable, their accounts receivable, payroll, their accounting functions, audit, financial reporting, etc. on the temporary basis. And then the contract has set to expire June 30th of 2020. There is an extension if needed for 2 additional 90-day periods. But as of right now, that's where we are.
Can I ask a question on that? And I don't mean to ask inappropriately, but I'm just wondering, I know Burke is not in very good condition. Is there an expectation that we'll be that the Board of Ed will be going out to hire somebody new or leaving that position open for,
They have no idea right now.
okay. I mean, I think we're all hoping and praying for him, but I am a little concerned about the impact on you. I know it's nice.
We shall see.
Yeah. You had a big job, and
Yeah.
it's a lot for one person to do both your job and his, and as a long-term solution, that's,
Well, we have the new accounting coming up
Yep.
this spring, so that'll definitely be helpful. And we're just gonna take it day by day and figure it out and see what the kinks are and
I think it's also an opportunity, though, to look at potentially down the road, depending upon what happens with Berk's Health. We've talked for years about trying to get the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen to combine some departments because it would provide some savings. And that's not to say that you would do both jobs forever and ever, but you might hire someone in at a lower level, and there'd be some savings there. So I hope that that's staying in the back of your mind.
yes.
I just want to commend the Board of Finance, because you did point out 3 areas that you had asked the town and Board of Ed to look together: finance, IT, and building maintenance. So to the extent those remain our priorities, that would be great.
Right.
Okay. And then the last item that I wanted to share with you is the volunteer firefighter and ambulance personnel tax abatement ordinance. Recently, there was some state legislation that passed that allowed towns to update the increase in the amount of the tax abatement to first responders. The chief administrative officer for the Simsbury Fire District did request that we open this back up and take a look at that to see if there would be any interest in moving along the state legislation or within those guidelines. The Board of Selectmen did review the request at their January 13th meeting and did agree to reopen the work group. The last paragraph there has some updated balances on where we are now as far as first responder abatements. We're about $68,500. And then in this upcoming fiscal year 21 budget cycle, if these were to be implemented, it would have an impact of about $33,750. And then over the 3-year budgetary impact, the overall impact would be about $139,000. So this is something that I will keep track of and let you know how the work goes.
Still cheaper than hiring
Yeah,
firemen.
I completely agree with that, but I'm going to ask maybe an inappropriate question. This
That's
comes
usually
out.
my job.
No, I know, but this comes out of the town's general fund. Seems like we pay into the tax district's general fund, and that this might be an appropriate place for that to come out of instead of the general
For
fund.
the fire district to pay.
Fire
Yes.
district.
Yeah, right.
No, that's not
Absolutely.
inappropriate, that's entirely
All
appropriate,
right.
and has my
Good
full
thought.
support.
All right. I don't know what would be necessary to make that happen, but,
An
Yeah, that's a good
MOU.
point.
Yeah.
And that fund is very healthy.
yeah. Okay.
Well,
So
would it
there's a task force for this, so I'm sorry.
No,
Okay.
It still comes from the
Are we on
taxpayer,
that
the
task
question
force?
is where.
Is there somebody on that task force?
No, not from the Board of Finance.
Well, but she's our liaison, so, but I'm not looking for volunteers. We don't need another task group, but, huh? Yeah. All right.
So Jackie Bados and Wendy Maxtudis agreed to serve on the work group. In the spring, previously, Chris Peterson and Sean Askham had served on that work group, and we had involved the fire district as well as our ambulance company. So we will be asking them to provide assistance again with the review and analysis.
And just one other thing, while we're on this topic, I'm not sure where we left off with the ambulance, volunteer ambulance and the town support for that. Is there any update on that?
They got their act together.
Stop paying.
At this time, we still have no request for a contribution for
Okay.
them for their
Okay.
operating. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay. let's do our capital plan review and discussion, and we'll finish with the minutes and the communications. So I'll tee this up a little bit and then ask Amy and Lisa to contribute. You know, when we had our tri-board meeting, and certainly in response to the long-range plan, there's a lot of discussion around capital and big dollars and everything else. And so we didn't want to go into detail today, but we wanted to talk about sort of long-range, how we want to think about a project of the magnitude of the long-range plan and the ability of the balance sheet of the town to carry debt, and the timing of all of this, and the methods that we used to go into these sort of long-range plans, where we're starting down a path that will impact years 2030 and 2035. And so we've done a couple of things in preparation for today, was to talk about the Barbara Pettigene chart, and that tends to show the impact over the next 5 to 7 years. And then separately, we worked on a sort of, if you were to layer in this debt, how high does the outstanding debt get, and then how does that impact the debt service? So what do we want to show or discuss, or how
So
do?
can we start with existing debt and just sort of say, okay, we haven't approved any projects for 2021. Where are we on our debt service? So the blank sheet. I know, you can see.
I'm going to copy it quick and then
I know.
See
People
this?
watching, I have to go get mustard.
So that's where we are before we've approved any capital coming up. And you'll see the capacity there is the cash for capital at the top if we wanted to go to 7%. The existing,
Was my question. The blue
So
line is
20
7.
is
is that 7 or 6.7, Amy?
7%.
it's 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one that's Jackie and Eric, as we get to budget, one of the conversations our board will have is how much do we want to spend in the cash for capital, or are we going to try and keep the mill rate low by not expending capital in that capacity to get to 7%? That will really depend on what budgets you bring in. But if we then add what's in the CIP for 2021, what does the chart look like?
Just 2021.
Yeah, and then do the whole CIP for the third. These have not been approved by the Board of Selectmen or Marie, and we expect these to change, but this is just order of
So
magnitude.
you're layering in one more year of
I'm layering in
expenditure?
one more year.
Okay.
And then we'll do the CIP. Right. And so then you'll see when it hits, so you approved 2021, but it doesn't really hit until 2022. And that's versus the timing. And so we're still okay. So now put in the whole CIP. Without any additional assumptions, just pretending like there was no Board of Ed. New proposal. So here, this is where I'm seeing like a little different stuff. So we just did the 1 year, and again, I don't see colors that well. But suddenly, when you put in the whole CIP, we're above the guidance of the Board of Finance. When Linda and I sat with you, how do you fix that? And the way you do that is you can, it's the timing of when you start a project. So if you start delay a year, or you delay 2 years, or you eliminate a project. So the long-term message is, yeah, this year you might be okay if you approve it, but if you approve it this year, these better be your top priorities, because in the future years, you're gonna have to not approve as many unless we change our recommendation. So if you have an optional capital this year, you might say, oh, maybe we don't do it because I know I'm gonna need a lot of capital capacity in the outgoing years. So those are the things. So you can already see we're looking at a huge increase in above the line. And what is that? That's almost at 10%, right? So for every $2 million, that's a mill rate. So if 7 is our number, at 10, you're at $1.5 million increase just in spending on capital. And the question is, what is our capacity for that? And that's gonna
So every
be
$2 million in debt service,
$2 million expenditure, so debt service of 2 million, yes.
which is not the same as the amount you're borrowing.
The amount of borrowing is quite a bit more than
Right,
that.
I just
That's
want to
correct.
make that
Yes,
clear so
that's
the public
100%,
understands
yes,
that.
100% correct. And so then, and these numbers are growing because it's probably more than 1.5 mil because our operating budgets are growing, and this projects them growing at 3%. So if we really were using a 2.5% increase, that debt is quite a bit more above the debt service line. So it's baked in some assumptions, but the bottom line is, choose your capital projects carefully this year, because they're gonna impact what you can do in the future, unless there's more capacity to go above that.
And additionally, there's not a whole lot of room there for, for a whole bunch of new schools.
Well, so then it gets into, okay, so that's where I think Rob really did a nice,
Yeah, so mine isn't in color and it's gonna be impossible to read. But I did print them for you, so you can look at the numbers if you have your reading glasses.
Really tiny thing.
Right. So what I tried to do was just a simplistic way of looking at how the layering of the projects, which, again, this is fairly rudimentary, and it's based on my understanding that there would be 3 school builds and 1 renovation. And the school builds are about $35 million, starting in 2023, and 5 years space between those, and that the renovation happens at the end of the year, the end of the term, so, and this goes out to 2037. And then I made some basic assumptions that probably do not include all of the capital that we just showed on the chart with the lines above the 7%. But it includes the $21 million for Henry James being issued in 2020. It probably actually hits 2021. So you can take exception with any of the, but what I was trying to do was scale the timing of the layering to see what the impact is on both total debt and then total debt as, debt service as a percentage of the budget. So down at the bottom, I just added up the outstanding debt as some of it that's already issued amortizes, and adding 100% funding for the schools, probably be some chargebacks from grants and other things, but we get to $100 million in total debt in, basically, when you build the second school in 2028. That's sort of the worst spot. And if you start with a $100 million budget, which is about where we are, and grow at 3% a year, the debt service at the high point is just under 10, about 9.58%.
And does that assume no additional capital items that aren't already on the CIP?
Well, I didn't go into that detail, Linda. What I did was I issued $10 million of new bonds for other things every 2 years, $5 million a year, basically, for other things that we that we put on there. I didn't look at the specific projects or the magnitude of them. So, because I
Guess, yeah.
worked quickly putting this together.
So our
But-
actual spend is more like 6 or 7 million, so that might be a little different, but that, I think, is just tremendous. That's very helpful.
Yeah, so to combine the two, the slide, the color slide and my slide does not have all of those projects that are in the capital plan at the time that they are on the colored slide, because that would make this look worse in '23 and '24, probably about the same, maybe a little bit, the combined numbers would be higher.
So the projects that are on the CIP now are not included in here.
5 million of it.
$5 million of debt service a year, $5 million of new debt a year is in here.
Okay.
We're more like 6 to 7, is that?
Is what it needs to be,
Yeah.
yeah, so, I mean, I can do that, but it might move it up another percent from 9.5 to 10.5, which is, I'm saying that's a serious number. But I think the point, so I'll tell you where I was coming from in trying to do this. One, there's a headline number here that's very frightening, $120 to $130 million of construction costs. That's a big number, there's no question about it. But when you spread it out, it takes us from where we are today, roughly $50 million in debt when we've issued all of the debt for Henry James, to over just about $100 million in debt. And that will take the debt service up, from 10 million, from 7% to 8 or 9%. And we need to quantify that in terms of mill rates. That's hard to do because we don't know what the revenue side is, we don't know what the grant list growth might be, but if we can assume that it would be the same, no greater or less than the inflation I used in the operating budget, then the question for this plan for the town, as we do this survey of wants, likes, needs, and what we have to do is, can we take somebody's average taxes from $8,000 to $12,000? I don't think it's quite that bad, but I'm just throwing out numbers. I probably shouldn't have done it that way. I should have done it in mill rate, because that frightens people. But no, so I don't mean that, but I'm saying that I think that's the work as a board.
That you need to do.
These are not the numbers. This is just a concept of the spreading it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we think about working with the work group for the long-range plan, our role as Board of Finance is to say, one, we've got to be real about this $100 million of debt, the outstanding, and when it comes on and how it comes on. We have to be real about what each of these projects costs. Are we getting the right value? We're not building,
And should they be done?
there's a
I don't want to
baseline.
assume that everything that just got proposed is going to happen.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, for
I think we're saying the same thing. Yeah, or to the extent it does, or could we do a remodel instead of a tear and build? All of those things are part of affordability,
Right.
appropriateness.
But we can look at a worst-case scenario, and that's what it is.
Yeah, I was just trying to get to a sense of,
Proportion.
yeah.
So Amy, I don't know if you can take what Rod did and try and sort of true it up and look at mill rate trends and, not today,
Not tonight.
no.
You're
Come on,
good.
you're
She's
good.
good.
Expect you.
I'm thinking
But she's not
for-
that good.
For June and July, when we have the big capital project.
We should
or-
have a better vision then of the staging and the magnitude. And then I think we'll be able to get to a narrower range of the impact.
And then best practices, and Linda and I couldn't figure out GFOA best practices on debt per capita. And from our rating agencies, what are they looking for? Because we just had a great ratings call. I would hate to then go in and say, surprise, we just doubled our debt per capita. You guys good with that? I'd want to know if they're good with that before we do that. Because this, in some ways, in 1 year, it will be a doubling of our debt per capita. And that's fairly
So is the
rapid.
goal then to kind of create the averaged tax
Yeah,
to show the relative increase?
I think
With the
we need to
budget,
show, an order of
rather than going to
magnitude maybe.
Starbucks
Huh?
for a cup of coffee,
Yeah.
we're going to be going for double espressos?
I think you're going to stop right there, mister.
No, but I think there's two dangers that I see. One is throwing our hands up and going, oh, this is way too expensive. We shouldn't start and do, we've already stepped down that road. Now we need to be thoughtful about it. The other danger is to have some part of the town be really excited about what we could build and be wanting that, and then pitting it against the people who are afraid of what it's going to cost. And I'm not naive. There's going to be a lot of discussions around those two topics. But I think we, as a Board of Finance, need to understand generally where those levers are. And we can always come back and say, no, you have to build a new school for 20 million, because that's all, if you're going to do that, that's all we can afford. And they'll say, well, we can't do that. Well, maybe go back to the drawing boards. But
That'll be part of the discussion.
It's
with
an
the debt-
iterative-
With the debt service policy workshop, and I'm assuming that's part of the discussion, right?
well, the debt policy work group is really just trying to get a debt policy that we both agree on.
Right, but just remember that policy has 5 to 7% cap. If you guys are all thinking about putting in these
Well-
school
Oh, we're not
projects.
thinking about
That,
it.
that would have to
Yeah,
be
no.
changed,
Or there has to be a
Leave it.
mechanism by which
5 to 7 now.
we decide not to exceed it, and for what
Right.
reason, and what are the,
Parameters of it.
who has the
One of
authority to do
One of
that?
the questions during the bond meeting call is if you adhere to your own policies. So if we do exceed 7% at some point, we need to make sure we change the
Yeah.
policy.
And one of the things I know, sort of off topic, and I'm sorry Derek wasn't here, but since Maria, you're here, and I don't know if there's a Board of Selectmen representative on the task force, so to the extent, who is that? Wendy. So, one of the things I know you guys have discussed and that wasn't presented is, we saw in the presentation, well, what's the economic development impact to Terrifil in closing a school? Because I thought the Board of Selectmen had said that they were interested in economic development of Terrifil with the Greenway and stuff like that. And then the sustainability initiative you have, is that consistent, tearing down a building and building a new one? Is that consistent with the sustainability priority that has been articulated? In some ways, that's a Board of Selectmen call, but I just noticed that there was a tremendous inconsistency with what I've heard from the Board of Selectmen, what was being recommended by the Board of Ed. I understand two different, perhaps, charges, but since it all comes to the Board of Selectmen for reconciliation, I hope that that will be added to the conversation, at the task force level at least.
So are we sort of talking about other things that we would like in the way of information for the debt discussion we'll have in June or July? June?
Sure.
We can do that.
Sure.
Because one other concern I have is if we were to fund all of that $150 or so million, how much capital is left for anything else? And so what I'd like to see is kind of a historical trend of what percentage of the debt service has been for Board of Selectmen items versus Board of Ed items, and where would that go? What will happen to that line? Is there going to be any room left for other projects? And related to that is a question I have. I mean, we know the Board of Ed has 7 schools. I think the Board of Selectmen has something like 48 buildings. I don't know the relative square foot, square feet of those. So it may be that the Board of Ed has as many square feet as the town does, but I have no clue. But I'd like to have some sense of the relativity of capital that you have to maintain versus capital that they have to maintain. And then C is our capital investment reflecting in parity what you actually both are responsible for maintaining.
Our CAFRA lists asset depreciation at about $6 million a year. And so the question is, we don't want to invest in the Board of Ed and depreciate the capital on the town side by not maintaining our buildings. So I think that's an excellent point. And how are we going to do both? We don't want to sacrifice one for the other.
All right. Eric?
Thanks, Rob. On a related note, one of the things we've been interested in is, I guess, fast-tracking the town facilities master plan, which has been funded for a number of years, so that we're looking at all of our capital needs holistically in
Yes.
this discussion.
Highly encouraged.
Yes, I strongly
That's a
support that.
GFOA best practice when it was implemented, so I'm really pleased to see that you're
Yeah.
fast tracking it. That was a priority at one point, and I'm glad to see it's coming back as a priority.
Well, and it gets to my concern. I mean, you don't want the Board of Ed to, like, okay, we're going to dominate the capital world for the next 30 years, and then 2 years later, you get your facility plan done and discover you need just as much as they do. So we need to look at both.
All right. Great, appreciate that. This is will certainly be ongoing as we go through the budget process. And then look forward to a deeper dive in June and July meetings. Okay, approval of the minutes. This goes all the way back to the tri-board meeting, I guess. And I think, just for everybody's reference, we added this sort of addendum at the back to make sure that we had communicated accurately and that everybody had the detail of our recommendations. So I think that's helpful.
That's really for Eric and Jackie.
Anybody have any comments on the minutes? All right, so let's move to adopt the minutes as presented.
So moved?
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And then the last item is communication. And Amy, you had a couple things you wanted to mention here?
Capital budget form. This is just the most updated budget form that the town manager's office is using to prepare its capital budget. So based on the recommendations from last budget cycle, this is the new form that was created. So just so that you all have that. And then the memorandum of agreement between the town of Simsbury and the Simsbury Board of Education for the financial management services is just a copy of the agreement as an FYI.
I had a question on the capital thing. First of all, thank you. I think this is more detailed. And I know you've got project description. It's little, and I hope when you do the project description, that gets bigger so that we can understand what the projects are. But the one thing that has been frustrating, I think, to this board for many years, and I add to that, having been on the other side of it, is start and end dates for construction. We have funding dates, you know, estimated expenditures, but if we could have start dates, we had 2 projects that we had approved and never started in 3 years, and then we had to go back. So how are we going to track start dates and end dates? I understand with the expenditures, that gives us a good start, but I saw in the past, we didn't always hold to that. So how are we going to track start and end dates? Still working, it's work in progress.
I think that would be incredibly difficult, particularly the end dates for projects that may not even come to fruition or projects that we haven't even entered into a design phase. So I think to try and use a best guesstimate on both the start and end dates, particularly for projects that require design, I think would be very premature.
Even for a given current year, if we're approving funding.
I mean, we could try and do that. I mean, again, what we're trying to do with our capital budgeting, a couple, again, of sort of main concepts that are really important to me as the manager that we've conveyed to staff is that we want to be appropriately planning based on staff capacity. And so we don't want to be asking for funding that we don't think we can use in a particular capital year, as well as the focus on existing infrastructure and assets. So really, those are a couple of priorities. So we're trying to do very realistic capital budgeting, again, from a perspective of, what can we realistically accomplish in the year in which the funds are given to us. So again, it's a little bit of a different approach, and we've been trying to emphasize that with staff, because we don't want projects, stacking up. I mean, that's just not good for a lot of reasons. So again, we have been trying to convey that to staff and trying to be, again, more realistic in what we're budgeting for and spacing projects out. Those are the types of conversations we've been having during our capital budget conversations with the departments.
I have one other topic under
Sure.
communications. So we did get a letter, a newsletter, the Board of Ed sends them out periodically. And I guess they send them to everyone in town, or do they only to the parents? Yeah, because I got one, I don't have kids in school, but I'm just wondering if the Board of Finance could do something similar, because I think a lot of people get those Board of Ed communications, and if they don't have kids in school, they don't read it. I've had a few people, as I'm sure many of us have, say they knew nothing about the hearing and what's going on, and I think it would be useful to have the Board of Finance communicate to the public both about the importance of weighing in on the budget, when the public hearing is coming up, and like, here are some big issues, one of which would be, there's going to be a debate about what to do with school construction.
Didn't we discuss that a couple of years ago? About
I've
getting the
advocated for a long
for the
time.
listserv account from the school board? And I don't remember what the resolution was. I didn't know if we had the ability to communicate, but I don't know that to be true or not.
I think we should look at it again. I do recall that we had this very same discussion, and there was some reason we didn't proceed, and I thought it was
Well, it is
procedural, but.
expensive to
Right.
do a paper mailing.
I don't
mean,
think
that's
it
gonna
was,
cost you
I don't think it was
$4,000.
just, I don't really remember, honestly.
So when the budget is passed or, going to the hearing after that, it becomes very difficult to do a communication without. But as you'll recall, Rob, you and I actually did a communication when the governor was proposing cutting 5 million.
Oh, yeah.
And we did a, brace for impact letter and let the public know there's a potential giant knocking at our door. And that was actually, we got a lot of positive feedback from that because we were able to alert the public, okay, here's one big issue coming up and here's
All right,
things
so
that are
let's
coming.
do this for our next meeting. I think it's a certainly important perspective and idea. So let's find out if, what we can or can't do by state statute. I don't see any
Yeah.
reason why we couldn't.
I think Lisa's right, that it's when you're within that tight time frame to the vote.
Yeah,
But if we did something now,
maybe that's something Melissa or somebody else, she seems to know find all of these kinds of things that we can or can't do, and then maybe, or some examples, if there are other towns that have communication from the Board of Finance, or. So I think it's probably something you have to do either regularly or within very defined periods.
The other thing I'll just put out there, since we're talking about communications, my gosh, wouldn't it be lovely if the town and the Board of Ed could redo the budget flyer? I think it would just be, I think we could communicate much better than we have been in the past. I know it's very hard because you get crunched and you're in the middle of a budget, it has to go through so many approvals, state secretary's office and council and stuff, but to the extent we could think about that and work on that, that would just, I think, be really helpful for the public to understand what they're voting on.
Yes, Maria.
Yes, it is something that we've discussed. There's definitely, I think, some room for improvement in that communication piece. One of the challenges around state elections and elections enforcement is that, right, once sort of that timeline hits where you now have adopted a budget that you're sending to referendum, whatever we send out, we have to be very careful that it's not being construed as advocacy in any way.
Right.
And so typically what we've done with our 2-page flyer is we send that off to elections enforcement. We've tried to keep that content pretty simple, is my understanding. We made a few tweaks to it this past year in terms of better communicating mill rate and sort of impact on the average taxpayer. But the piece that I think we were in agreement that we were really missing was a statement of fact in terms of major deviations in revenues and or expenditures to either the town or Board of Education budget. And so we were getting a lot of questions that were coming from residents about particularly some of the plan transfers that were very confusing. So we did end up developing a sort of a separate piece. I don't know if you recall,
Yes.
but prior to referendum, we did run that by elections enforcement to make sure that it was construed as factual as opposed to advocacy. They okayed it for us. And so again, I think that's the piece that we talked about that was really missing, and where I think we could have some room for improvement is trying to, again, point out those key differences in either revenues or expenditures and just get, elections enforcement sort of okay that yes, this is construed as factual as opposed to advocacy. But that's definitely something we've talked about doing.
And the other thing, the pie charts, they're not the same for the town and the Board of Ed, so if we could do apples to apples. I know how hard this is, because it's been this way for 20 years, so but to the extent you can think about it, that would, I think, really help with the communication.
Okay.
I make
Anything
a
else? We
motion,
go to the order?
I just make a motion to adjourn.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, guys.